The fluorescent lights in Victoria Hayes' office had never felt this cold. She was signing the merger papers, $500 million in blue ink, when the glass door shattered her silence. A man in worn work boots, desperate and trembling. "Madam, my mom didn't wake up," he said, and Victoria's pen froze, the blue ink bleeding across the contract. She knew that phrase, not from him, but from 30 years ago, when an older woman in a modest uniform used to hum lullabies in the kitchen and call her "My Little Vicky." The man held out a photograph, a 60-something woman in a simple dress, young Victoria on her lap, both smiling before the world taught them about money and betrayal. Victoria's knuckles turned white, gripping the desk edge. The merger papers lay forgotten as 3 words left her lips, more prayer than command. "Show me now." Victoria's assistant tried to intercept them in the hallway, but Victoria waved her off with a sharp gesture that made the younger woman step back in surprise. The CEO never broke protocol. She never left meetings unfinished. But now she was following this stranger and his dirt-smudged child toward the elevator, her $600 heels clicking against marble floors that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The man, Ben, he'd said his name was Ben Cooper, kept his hand on the boy's shoulder, protective and steady despite the tremor Victoria could see running through his entire body. The child, maybe 7 years old, had Margaret's eyes, dark brown with flecks of gold when the light hit them just right. Victoria remembered those eyes watching her practice piano, encouraging her through every missed note, every moment her father's expectations felt too heavy to carry. The hospital smell hit her before the automatic doors fully opened. Antiseptic and fear and something else Victoria couldn't name, but recognized in her bones. The scent of time running out. Ben moved through the corridors with the terrible familiarity of someone who'd been making this walk for days, maybe weeks. He didn't ask directions. He didn't slow down. Jake's small hand clutched his father's jacket, and Victoria found herself noticing the worn patches on the denim, the way Ben's boots had been resoled multiple times, the careful way he'd combed his son's hair that morning, even though the world was falling apart. These were things she'd stopped noticing years ago, the small dignities people maintained when they had nothing left but their dignity. Margaret Cooper lay in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with false cheerfulness. She looked smaller than Victoria remembered, thinner. The strong hands that used to knead bread dough and braid Victoria's hair and hold her when nightmares came. Those hands lay motionless on the white sheets, an IV taped to the back of one with medical tape that looked too harsh against papery skin. Victoria stopped in the doorway. For 30 years she'd imagined this moment, though never quite like this. In her imagination, Margaret had been angry or proud or indifferent. Never this silent, never this still. "The doctor says she has maybe 48 hours. Ben said quietly, not looking at Victoria. He was watching his mother's face like he could will her back to consciousness through sheer focus. "There's a tumor. Brain cancer. It's been growing for months, but she didn't tell us. Didn't want to worry us," she said. "By the time I noticed she was forgetting things, getting headaches, it was already stage 4. His voice cracked on the last word, and he cleared his throat roughly. Jake pressed closer to his father's leg, and Ben's hand found the boy's head automatically, that instinctive parent gesture Victoria had seen 1,000 times, but never quite understood until now. Victoria stepped into the room. The machines beeped faster for a moment, as if Margaret's unconscious body sensed her presence. "What did the doctors say?" Her own voice sounded strange, too formal, too controlled. The voice she used in boardrooms, not hospital rooms, not with family, though she supposed she'd forfeited the right to use that word years ago. "They say there's a procedure," Ben replied. His jaw worked for a moment before he continued. "Experimental. Uses some kind of AI-assisted surgical system that can target the tumor without damaging the surrounding tissue. It's her only chance, but..." He stopped, and Victoria saw the muscles in his throat working. The system isn't approved for public use yet. It's in clinical trials, and the only one in the region is at the research hospital downtown. Your research hospital, Ms. Hayes, the one your company developed the technology for. The room tilted slightly. Victoria gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Of course it would be her technology. The medical AI system she'd poured 3 years and $40 million into developing. The crown jewel of the merger she was supposed to sign in. She checked her watch. 6 hours. The technology she'd explicitly promised the acquiring company would remain proprietary for 18 months, giving them exclusive rights that made the $500 million price tag worth it. And you came to me because... Victoria started, but Ben cut her off. Because the hospital director said the only way to access it outside the clinical trial protocol is with direct authorization from the technology owner. That's you. He finally looked at her then, and Victoria saw something in his eyes that made her want to look away. Not anger. Worse than anger. Disappointment. Mom didn't want me to come. Even when she was still conscious yesterday, she said... His voice caught. She said you'd already made your choice 10 years ago, that you'd chosen money over everything else, that I shouldn't waste my time. Then why are you here? Victoria heard herself ask. Because she's my mother, Ben said simply. And because Jake deserves to know his grandmother. And because... He pulled out another photograph from his wallet, this one newer. Margaret at a school play, Jake dressed as a tree, both of them laughing. Because this woman has spent every day of my life teaching me that family means you show up even when it's hard, even when it's easier to walk away, even when the person you're showing up for doesn't deserve it. The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that it hadn't been that simple, that the lawsuit had been about principle, about her father's legacy, about Margaret overstepping boundaries. But standing here, looking at this woman who'd raised her more than her own mother ever had, who'd stayed after Victoria's mother died when Victoria was 6, who'd worked double shifts to help pay for Victoria's private school because her father's business was struggling, all those explanations felt like exactly what they were. Excuses. The merger, Victoria said slowly. If I authorize the use of that technology outside the trial parameters, if I give the hospital access, the deal falls apart. Ben finished. His tone was flat, neither accusing nor pleading, just stating facts. The hospital director explained it to me. Your buyers want exclusive rights. They find out you gave the tech away, even for a medical emergency. They'll claim breach of contract, walk away. And apparently your company's board isn't exactly loyal. He said the last word carefully, like he was trying to be diplomatic about something he'd clearly heard gossip about. Victoria's laugh came out bitter. That's one word for it. The board had been circling for months, waiting for any excuse to push her out. She'd been too aggressive, too uncompromising, too focused on innovation over profits. They wanted a CEO who'd play it safe, who'd maximize shareholder returns instead of pouring money into medical AI that wouldn't see profits for years. The merger was supposed to solve everything, a massive payout that would make everyone rich enough to stop complaining. Losing it would be like throwing blood into shark-infested waters. Jake tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, can I give Grandma the picture I drew? His voice was small, uncertain in the way children get when they sense the adults around them are drowning in problems too big to explain. Sure, buddy, Ben said softly. He lifted the boy up so he could tuck the drawing, a crayon rendition of 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, under Margaret's still hand. Jake patted his grandmother's arm gently, then leaned close to whisper, I need you to wake up, Grandma. Dad cries at night when he thinks I'm asleep, and I don't know how to make him stop. Victoria turned away, blinking hard. Through the window she could see the city spread out below. Her city, the one she'd conquered through sheer will and ruthless focus. From up here, people looked like ants. Problems looked manageable. Choices seemed clear-cut. But in this room that smelled of antiseptic and desperation, with a child's whispered plea hanging in the air and a dying woman who'd once been her only real mother, nothing was clear at all. "I need to make some calls," Victoria said finally. Her phone was already in her hand. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere." "Ms. Hayes," Ben started, but Victoria was already walking out, her heels clicking a rapid staccato against the linoleum. She made it to the hallway before her hand started shaking. The phone felt heavy. Impossibly heavy. She pulled up her assistant's number, then her lawyer's, then the board chairman's. Her thumb hovered over each name, unable to press down. 10 years ago, she'd stood in a lawyer's office and signed papers that took away the $500,000 her father had left to Margaret Cooper in his will. She'd argued it was undue influence, that Margaret had manipulated a grieving widower, that the money belonged to the family business. The truth she'd never admitted out loud, was that she'd been angry. Angry that her father had loved this housekeeper enough to leave her what amounted to half his liquid estate. Angry that Margaret had been there at the end when Victoria had been too busy with her startup to visit more than once a month. Angry that Margaret's grief had seemed as deep as her own, as if hired help had any right to mourn like real family. She'd won the lawsuit. Margaret had left without a fight, dignified even in defeat. And Victoria had taken that $500,000 and invested it in her company, which had eventually made her a billionaire. She'd told herself she'd done the right thing. That business was business. That sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now that investment, that blood money, if she was honest, had grown into a technology that could save Margaret's life. And using it would cost Victoria everything she'd built on top of that stolen foundation. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Board members arriving for merger signing in 5 hours. Press is confirmed. Stock price up 12% on the news. Everything's perfect." Victoria looked back through the window. Ben had climbed into the hospital bed next to his mother, carefully avoiding the tubes and wires. Jake was curled up on his other side. 3 generations held together by love and loss, and the possibility of more loss than any of them could bear. Nothing about that room was perfect, but everything about it was real. She made the first call. "Anderson," she said when her lawyer picked up. "I need you to draft an authorization letter for University Medical Center. Full access to the NeuroMap AI system for emergency use. I want it airtight. No way for them to claim misuse or legal liability. And I need it within the hour. Victoria, the merger. I know what it means for the merger, Frank. Just draft the letter." The second call was harder. The board chairman answered on the first ring, his voice already edged with suspicion. "Victoria, shouldn't you be preparing for the signing?" "There's been a complication," Victoria said. She forced her voice to stay level, professional. This was just another negotiation, just another deal, except it wasn't, and they both knew it. "I'm authorizing emergency use of the NeuroMap system. I know what the exclusivity clause says. I know what it means." The silence on the other end stretched so long, Victoria checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, "Are you having a breakdown? Because this seems like a breakdown. We can get you help. Postpone the signing." "I'm not having a breakdown, Gerald. I'm making a choice. A choice to destroy this company, to throw away 18 months of negotiations, to cost every shareholder, including yourself, billions of dollars." His voice rose with each question. "For what, Victoria? For what possible reason?" Victoria closed her eyes. Behind them, she could see Margaret braiding her hair for the piano recital. Margaret staying up all night when she had the flu. Margaret quietly paying the electric bill when Victoria's father was too proud to admit the business was failing. Margaret who'd loved her, not because she had to, but because she'd chosen to. Because it's the right thing to do, Victoria said quietly. Because I've spent 10 years being the kind of person who only does what's profitable, and I don't want to be that person anymore. Then you won't be a person with a company, Gerald said flatly. The board will vote you out today, before you can do any more damage. I know, Victoria said. Do what you have to do. I'm doing what I have to do. She ended the call before he could respond. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was something, at least. She walked back to Margaret's room, where Ben was sitting up now, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The authorization will be here within the hour, Victoria said. The hospital can do the surgery as soon as they have a team ready. Ben's face crumpled for just a moment before he controlled it. Thank you, he whispered. Then, more carefully, what will this cost you? My company, my reputation, probably my net worth, or most of it. Victoria surprised herself with a small, genuine smile. Pretty much everything I've spent the last 20 years building. I can't let you do that, Ben said, but there was no conviction in his voice. They both knew he'd let her do exactly that, if it meant saving his mother. You're not letting me do anything, Victoria replied. I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference. She moved closer to the bed, close enough to reach out and touch Margaret's hand. The skin was cool, papery. Victoria had forgotten how small Margaret's hands were. They'd seemed so strong when she was a child. I owe her more than money can measure. I owe her. Her voice caught. I owe her an apology I'm 10 years too late giving, but maybe it's not too late for this. The next 36 hours blurred together in a haze of paperwork and waiting. Victoria's lawyer arrived with the authorization. The hospital's surgical team mobilized with impressive speed once they had permission to use the AI system. The surgery itself took 11 hours. Victoria spent them in the waiting room with Ben and Jake, learning that Ben was a carpenter who specialized in restoration work, that Jake loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist, that Margaret had been teaching Jake to bake bread every Sunday morning before she got sick. She learned that the lawsuit had devastated Margaret financially, but she'd refused to speak badly of Victoria to Ben. She said you were hurt and angry, and hurt people, Ben told her during hour 7, when Jake was finally sleeping against his shoulder and exhaustion had worn down their careful politeness. She said she hoped someday you'd heal enough to be happy. That's all she wanted for you, to be happy. Victoria couldn't speak for a long time after that. Her phone kept buzzing. Messages from board members, from her assistant, from reporters who'd somehow caught wind that the merger was falling apart. She turned it off after the first 20 messages and didn't turn it back on. When the surgeon finally emerged, Victoria stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her cold coffee. The doctor's face was professionally neutral, which could mean anything. The surgery was successful, she said, and Ben made a sound like he'd been punched. We removed 98% of the tumor. The remaining cells we can target with radiation and chemotherapy, but the prognosis is much better than it was 12 hours ago. She's in recovery now. It'll be a few hours before she wakes up, but... The doctor smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. I'm optimistic. Ben was crying. Victoria realized she was too. Jake woke up and asked if Grandma was okay, and Ben nodded because he couldn't speak. The three of them sat back down together, and somehow Victoria's hand found Ben's, and he squeezed it like she was family, like she'd earned the right to share this relief. Victoria didn't go back to her office for 3 days. She slept in hospital chairs and ate cafeteria food, and wore the same clothes until Ben's sister brought her a change of clothes because you're going to start offending the nurses. The board held an emergency vote and removed her as CEO, just as Gerald had promised. The merger collapsed. The stock price plummeted. Her carefully curated reputation as a brilliant, ruthless businesswoman shattered in real time across every financial news outlet. She found she didn't care as much as she'd thought she would. On the third day, Margaret woke up. Her eyes opened slowly, confused and unfocused at first. Then they found Ben's face and cleared. "Baby," she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "You're here." "I'm here, Mom," Ben said, his voice breaking. "Jake's here too, and—" He glanced at Victoria, uncertain. Margaret's gaze followed his. For a long moment, she just stared at Victoria. Then, impossibly, "Vicky? My little Vicky?" Victoria moved closer on shaking legs. "I'm here, Margaret. I'm so sorry. I'm so—" The words wouldn't come. There weren't enough words in the world for what she needed to say. But Margaret just smiled. That same gentle smile Victoria remembered from childhood. The one that said everything was forgiven before you even asked. "Come here, sweetheart," she whispered. And when Victoria leaned down, Margaret's thin hand came up to touch her cheek. "You came back to me." "I never should have left," Victoria managed. Victoria desktop. "But you did come back," Margaret said simply. "That's what matters. You came back." The next few weeks unfolded with surprising speed. Margaret's recovery was slower than they'd hoped, but steadier than they'd feared. The radiation treatments made her tired and sick, but she faced them with the same quiet strength Victoria remembered from childhood. Ben took leave from his carpentry work to care for her, and Victoria found herself showing up every day, sometimes twice a day, learning how to help in small ways. Fetching water, reading aloud when Margaret was too tired to hold a book, playing card games with Jake when he got bored of the hospital. Her former company settled with her for $10 million, a fraction of what her shares had been worth, but enough. Her lawyer called it being robbed in broad daylight. Victoria called it getting exactly what I deserved. She started looking at office spaces for a new venture, something smaller this time, more focused. Medical AI for underserved communities, she was thinking. Technology that saved lives instead of maximizing profits. One afternoon, about a month after the surgery, Victoria arrived at Margaret's hospital room to find her sitting up, looking more like herself than she had since the surgery. Ben was there with Jake, and they were all laughing at something on Jake's tablet. They looked up when she entered, and the warmth in their expressions made her chest tight. "Vicky," Margaret said, and Victoria still wasn't used to hearing that nickname again, still felt like crying every time. "Come sit. I want to talk to you about something." Victoria sat in the chair next to the bed, the same chair she'd been sitting in for weeks now. "What is it? Are you feeling okay? Do you need—" "I'm fine, honey. Hush." Margaret reached out and took Victoria's hand in both of hers. Her grip was stronger now. "I want to apologize to you." "What?" Victoria blinked. "Margaret, no! You don't owe me." "I do," Margaret interrupted gently. "When your father left me that money in his will, I should have refused it. Or at least talked to you first. I knew how it would look. I knew it would hurt you. But I was grieving and scared, and I told myself I'd earned it after 30 years, that I deserved it." She squeezed Victoria's hand. "The truth is, no amount of money was worth losing you. I should have fought harder. I should have made you listen when you wouldn't take my calls. I let you push me away because it was easier than forcing you to face how much pain you were in." "You didn't," Victoria started, but her voice broke. "I was horrible to you. I said horrible things in that courtroom. You were hurting," Margaret said simply. "You'd lost your father. You felt like I was taking him away from you all over again. I understood that, even when you didn't." She smiled, though her eyes were sad. I just wish I'd been braver. Wish I'd shown up at your office or your apartment and refused to leave until you talked to me. I wouldn't have listened, Victoria said honestly. I was too angry, too proud, too... She gestured helplessly. Too much like my father, probably. Your father was a good man who made mistakes, Margaret said. Just like you're a good woman who made mistakes, just like me, just like everyone. She pulled Victoria closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you came back, sweetheart. When it mattered most, you chose love over pride. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Jake climbed into Victoria's lap without asking, settling in like he'd been doing it his whole life. Aunt Vicky, he said seriously, are you going to keep visiting even after Grandma comes home? Victoria looked at Ben, who was watching her with an expression she was learning to read. Hope mixed with caution, wanting to trust, but protecting his son from disappointment. She looked at Margaret, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. She looked down at Jake, who was playing with the buttons on her blouse with the unconscious ease of a child who'd decided she was safe. Yes, Victoria said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. I'm going to keep visiting. I'm going to be here. I promise. Forever? Jake asked. Forever, Victoria agreed, and felt Margaret's hand squeeze hers hard. 6 months later, Victoria stood in a small office space in a deliberately unglamorous part of downtown. The space was a fraction of the size of her old office, and the view was of a brick wall instead of the city skyline. But the walls were covered in whiteboards full of equations and diagrams, and the small team she'd hired was brilliant and passionate, and actually cared about using technology to help people instead of just enriching shareholders. Ms. Hayes? One of her developers poked his head in. The hospital just confirmed. They want to be our first partner site. They're offering their entire patient database for the machine learning training. Victoria grinned. Tell them yes, and tell them we're ready to start next month. After he left, she turned back to her laptop, where an email from Ben sat open. He'd sent a photo. Margaret in her kitchen, teaching Jake how to braid challah bread, both of them covered in flour and laughing. The caption read, Sunday Bread Day. You're invited next week. No excuses. Victoria saved the photo to her desktop, right next to the one from her old life, her on the cover of Forbes, looking powerful and cold and utterly alone. She preferred the new one. It had flour and laughter and people who loved her not because of what she'd built, but because of who she was becoming. Her phone rang, an unknown number, but she answered anyway. Victoria Hayes. Ms. Hayes, this is Gerald Sanders. Her old board chairman. Victoria sat up straighter, old instincts kicking in. I'm calling to apologize, and to ask if you'd be willing to consult on a project. Consult? Victoria repeated carefully. The company's been struggling since the merger fell through, Gerald admitted. Turns out your vision was what kept us innovative. The new CEO is competent, but he's not you. And we've been approached by several non-profits wanting to use the NeuroMap technology for charitable work. We thought, given your new focus, you might be interested in overseeing that program. Victoria leaned back in her chair, considering. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately, hungry to get back into the game. A month ago, she might have hung up out of spite. But now... I'll think about it, she said. Send me the details. But Gerald, I don't work 80-hour weeks anymore. I don't miss dinners with my family. And I don't compromise on ethics for profit margins. If you can live with that, we can talk. Your family? Gerald asked, confused. I didn't know you'd gotten married. Victoria smiled, looking at the photo of Margaret and Jake covered in flour. I didn't. I just stopped being too stubborn to admit I already had one. That Sunday, Victoria showed up at Margaret's house with flowers and an apology for being terrible at baking. The house was small but warm, filled with the smell of rising dough and Jake's excited chatter about a dinosaur book he'd gotten from the library. Margaret hugged her tight at the door, and Ben handed her an apron with "Kiss the Cook" embroidered on it, grinning when she rolled her eyes. They spent the afternoon making bread, or trying to. Victoria's loaves came out lopsided and dense, and Jake giggled when she dramatically declared them artisanal mistakes. Margaret patiently showed her again how to knead the dough, her hands over Victoria's, just like they'd been 25 years ago when she was teaching a grieving little girl that sometimes working with your hands could quiet your mind. "You're getting better," Margaret said, even though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm getting practice," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference." Ben looked up from where he was helping Jake shape rolls. "You planning to do this every week?" "If you'll have me," Victoria said. She met his eyes, then Margaret's. "I've spent 10 years building an empire. I'd like to spend the next 10 building something that actually matters." "You already are, sweetheart," Margaret said softly. "You already are." Later, after they'd eaten dinner and Jake had fallen asleep on the couch with his head on Victoria's lap, Ben walked her to her car. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the bread they'd baked together. "Thank you," Ben said quietly. "For everything. For the surgery, obviously, but also for—" he gestured helplessly. "For showing up. For staying. Jake's already asking when Aunt Vicky is coming back." "I'm not going anywhere," Victoria promised. She surprised herself by meaning it. "I spent too long running. I'm done with that." Ben nodded, then hesitated. "Mom told me what you gave up. The merger, the company, everything. That had to be— I can't even imagine." Victoria looked back at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows, and Margaret was probably already planning next week's bread lesson. "I spent 10 years thinking I'd lost everything when I lost that lawsuit," she said slowly. "Turns out I'd actually lost everything when I won it. Took me long enough to figure that out." "But you did figure it out," Ben said. "That's what matters." "That's what your mother said," Victoria replied, and felt the truth of it settling into her bones. "I'm starting to think she might be right." She drove home through the city she'd once conquered, past the gleaming tower where her old office sat dark and occupied by someone else now. She didn't feel the pang of loss she'd expected. Instead, she felt something lighter, freer, like she'd been carrying a weight for so long she'd forgotten it was there until she finally set it down. Her apartment was quiet when she arrived, but it didn't feel empty the way it used to. There were photos now on the mantel, Margaret and Jake and Ben and her, taken at the hospital and at Sunday dinners and at Jake's school play, where he'd been a tree and she'd cheered louder than any CEO probably should. There was Jake's drawing on her refrigerator, the one with the rainbow and the stick figures holding hands. There was the bread she'd brought home, misshapen but made with love. Victoria changed into comfortable clothes and made herself tea, then settled onto her couch with her laptop. She had emails to answer and plans to finalize, and a whole new company to build from the ground up. It would be hard work. It would take years. She might fail, but she wouldn't be doing it alone. And she wouldn't be doing it for money or power or revenge. She'd be doing it because it was right. Because it mattered. Because somewhere along the way, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and hope, she'd remembered who she used to be before she learned to measure her worth in dollars and deals. She'd remembered the little girl Margaret used to call Vicky, who'd believed that being successful meant being good, who'd believed that having everything meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. It had taken her 30 years and losing nearly everything to find her way back to that girl. But she was back now, and this time she wasn't letting go.